The following is a presentation of Chandler Christian Church in Chandler, Arizona. For more information, please go to chandlercc.org.
Would have happened. This is just an absolutely incredible story that every one of you need to know. It's especially a poignant story for women and for girls growing up to see how they can stand strong in the faith, but it's really applicable for every one of us. Now, as we begin this morning, let me ask you a question. Can you pick out a pivotal moment or decision in your life that has had profound effect on the rest of your life? Maybe there are several of them. Something that happened, situation took place, a challenge was faced, a struggle that you had to deal with, a certain pivotal moment or decision in your life that's had profound effect and has affected the rest of your life. For many, there are lots of pivotal moments like this that seem to stick out. Moments when you are called to make a decision, that you are called into action. And when you make that decision, when you make that action, it has a resounding effect and impact on your life. It's made a huge difference. I call these crossroad moments. Crossroad moments, when you face those situations, that pivotal point where the decision you make, the action that you chose, or didn't, has had a profound impact upon your life. And oftentimes as we look back at these moments, we kind of look back on them with shame because we're really good at beating ourselves up. And so what we tend to remember, at least I did, the first ones are the decisions I made that were wrong decisions, or when I chose to do something in a wrong fashion, or an action that I did that was wrong, when I chickened out or made a poor decision or made a wrong choice. Now you can't change those, you can't go back. And we have a tendency to beat ourselves up over them, but we can learn from them, and we can be forgiven from them, and we can let them impact our lives and change us and let them go and help us move forward. Crossroad moments. And for most of us, these crossroad moments just happen. They just pop up. It's not something you plan for. It's not something you think, oh, I'm going to face a crossroads up here in the future. They just happen. And then you've got to make a decision. You've got to take action. And how are you going to do so? It's more of a reflection or reflex action or a reaction to it rather than a thought-out response. So who we are, our character, our values, our ethics, the training that we have received, the examples, the mentors that we have in our lives who have faced crossroad moments, the way they dealt with them, these are the things that make a difference in our determination of how we respond and react when those crossroad moments come. And whether that crossroad moment comes to mind from your past or maybe from your present, I will tell you this, there will be crossroad moments in your future. There'll be those pivotal moments in your life where the action you take or the decision you make will have a lasting impact on the rest of your life. And determining how you deal with crossroad moments when they happen is really determined on how you decide to deal with them now. The training you make now, the preparation you make now is going to make all the difference in how you deal with those crossroad moments that you face in the future. So with that in mind, let's get a little bit of history and bring up to speed of where we are. We talked about the fact that Solomon was the last king of the united Israel. And then as a result of his death, the kingdom separated. The south was called Judah, the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom was called Israel. And Israel was ruled by a whole group of kings that were bad, bad, bad. All of them were bad. And as a result, God had tolerance for a while, but couldn't stand it, and eventually God punished them. And I would say punished is the right word, because in 722 BC, he brought the Assyrians down, and they cast them out into the kingdom of Assyria, and pretty much obliterated the nation. Well, the Judah, the southern kingdom, lasted for a little bit longer. And they had bad kings. They also had a few good kings. And God was a bit more tolerant. But eventually, God punished or disciplined them as well. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar came down from Babylon and conquered the nation and exported a large group of Jewish population, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and others. And then in 586, he came back in and destroyed the city of Jerusalem and the temple, and exported even more back to Babylon. And he disciplined them to straighten them out, God did. And the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. And they were conquered by Cyrus the Great. And the reason I know he's great is because his name is Cyrus the Great. He was the great king of Persia. And he conquered the Babylonians. And when Cyrus became king, he allowed, by God's hand, if you weren't here last week or didn't read last chapter, need to do so, because God moved in a mighty way, and Cyrus allowed 50,000 Jewish people to go back, 70 years later, back to Palestine, what we call Palestine today, and rebuild the temple in the city of Jerusalem. But not all the Jewish people who were taken from by Nebuchadnezzar out of Judah returned. A number of them stayed in Persia. Persia was basically tolerant of their religious faith and allowed them to practice their faith in impunity and basically gave them a good way of life. And so now a couple of generations have been raised there. And so a number of these people did not go back in that 50,000. They stayed in Persia. And as they stayed in Persia, Cyrus then eventually died, and Darius II became his king. His son followed him. And after Darius II, another king, his son, took the throne. And in some translations, it uses the word Ahasuerus as his name. I prefer to use the word Xerxes. Xerxes the first, the great king of the Persians. Now, Xerxes ruled Persia, and Persian Empire was from India all the way around into Egypt. It was a huge worldwide kingdom. And there you see a relief of Xerxes on a wall there in Persia. Has some good curls working for him there. And he was a great leader, actually. The Greek historian Herodotus writes about him and portrays Xerxes in this way. He says he was capable of both generous nobility and diabolical cruelty. He could be both meticulously cautious and thoughtlessly rash. And if you've read the story, or as we talk about it today, you're going to see that that is an amazing, amazing description of who he was. Now, I wanted to tell this story. Some of you know this story, and I wanted to tell it in a bit of a different way to get impact to you. And so after doing some consultation, I asked my granddaughters for help. And so we came up with this plan to tell you the story. Xerxes is the king of Persia, and he was a great guy. See his little name tag there. He was a great guy, and he was a pretty good king, and he ruled with, as Herodotus says, he was good and he was also bad. He could be very good and he could be very, very bad. Well, he had a huge banquet that you saw the depiction of, and all 127 of his province leaders, as well as their other people, families, came to Susa, the capital city of Persia, for this great banquet. And this guy knew how to party, because 7 days he partied, and it was an open bar the entire time. Vashti, his wife, took care of the women, and these were all guys. It was stag, and they had this huge party going on, and these guys had been drinking and eating and carousing for 7 days in the man cave. And while they were there celebrating that special time, these guys got together, and then after day 7, when they were all a little bit, they came up with this idea that they would like to see Queen Vashti. Now, Queen Vashti was a beauty. Look at her. She was a beauty. Her hands kind of turned around the wrong way there, but she was an absolute beauty. And she was known as the most beautiful person in the kingdom. In fact, she was actually the granddaughter of Belshazzar, if you want to know that. And so the guys at the party said, "Hey, bring Queen Vashti in, and bring her in wearing her crown." Now, the Hebrew tradition is that they wanted her to come in wearing the crown and nothing else, if you can imagine. So Vashti's given a party for the ladies, and the word comes to her that Xerxes and the guys want her to come in and parade before them after they've been drinking for 7 days, wearing her crown and her crown alone. And like every woman in this room, she said a resounding no. And so when the word comes back that Vashti will not come in and see him, Xerxes is in a pickle. And his leaders say, "Wait a minute. Your queen refused to do what you asked her to do? This is bad news, because if the rest of the ladies of the kingdom throughout the provinces find out that Queen Vashti has denied you as the king and her husband what you've asked her to do, they're going to become unruly throughout the empire. You've got to do something about this." And so King Xerxes did. He called Vashti and he said, "You're no longer the queen." And so she's gone out of the picture. Tradition is she was beheaded. And they write an edict, the edict of the Medes and the Persians, and that edict is that all women are to be respectful of their husbands and obey them in everything their husbands ask them to do. This is where that obey came into the marriage vows that you get today. And so now he is king, and he's ruling, and everything is going pretty well. But he needs a queen. And so they call up Donald Trump, and they ask him to hold a beauty pageant. I think he's about that old. They call him to do a beauty pageant throughout Persia, 127 provinces, to pick the most beautiful girls to come and spend a night with the king, and out of them he would select his queen. And so they selected these girls, a beauty pageant, the most beautiful girls in all the kingdom. And the girl that won from the kingdom of, or the province of Susa, the capital province, was a young girl whose name was Hadassah. That's her Hebrew name. Her Greek name or Persian name was Esther. You know her better. And she was a knockout, drop dead gorgeous, the most beautiful girl in all of the capital city. In fact, she was the adopted daughter of Mordecai, who was one of the Jewish men who was taken when Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach were in 605 BC and deported to Babylon. And he was a Jewish man. And he adopted his cousin Esther to be his daughter because her parents had passed away. And so he had raised her as his own. And when Esther was selected to be one of the beauty contestants, they brought her to Persia. And the Bible says that she was spectacular. In fact, the Bible uses particular terminology that it doesn't really use for any other woman in the Scripture. On page 275 of the story, or Esther chapter 2, verse 7, the Scripture says, she had a lovely figure and was beautiful. And it makes this point that she had a lovely figure. I mean, look at her, okay? And she was beautiful. And so she was selected to be one of the women who would go before the king. So they brought her and 127 others, the queen winners, to the palace, and they gave her 12 months of spa treatments. How's that sound to you, ladies? That sound pretty good? 12 months of spa treatments. And they fixed her up and they covered her, and for 6 months she was bathed in the oil of myrrh, which if you've never smelled myrrh, it smells really good. So she was lathered up and lubed up and she was smooth. In fact, today that's called the oil of delay. And so they put that in her and she was wonderful. And then for 6 months she was trained in perfumes and she was trained in cosmetics so that she was really ready. And when her night came to spend with the king, she was going to be spectacular. So that night came for her to go before the king, to spend her one night. And he was waiting for her to come in, and when her turn came in and he saw her, he was like smitten. I mean, she was gorgeous. And look at her in her all spiffy red dress and everything. And he said, wow. And they spent the night together, and they kissed. And that's all they ever did. And at the end of the time, when she went back to the harem, he said, she is the one. She is the one. And so they called Esther back in, and they crowned her as the new queen of Persia. And everything was going okay. Now, her dad, Mordecai, was in the gates one day. And that's where all the officials, and he was an official of the palace. He was an official, and the gates were the place where they met, and everybody passed through there and where they had judgment. And Mordecai was in the gates one day, and he hears a couple of the king's officials talking about the fact that they want to assassinate the king. So Mordecai finds out about this, and he contacts Esther. And he tells Esther, who's the new queen, hey, some guys want to assassinate King Xerxes. You need to let him know. So Esther contacts King Xerxes, get his spiffy little name tag around there again, and she says, some guys want to attack you and assassinate you. And he's really mad. And he finds out who they are, and he kills them. In fact, he impales them upon a pole. Now, most people would tell you that that's a pole, and they stick him on it. But we do know that the Persians are the ones who invented crucifixion. And it was the Romans who actually picked that up from the Persians. And so I would tell you that it's very probable that when it says impaled upon a pole, that they were actually crucified. Well, because one of those may have been the prime minister, King Xerxes needs to anoint and appoint another person as prime minister. And so he selects a guy by the name of Haman. Can you say boo? Can you say boo? Haman is a bad guy. In fact, the Bible calls him an Agite. And we're not sure if this is specific or not. There's a lot of Jewish tradition that it is. But one of the kings that King Saul, years ago, was supposed to kill was Agag, the king of the Amalekites, in 1 Samuel chapter 15. And Saul did not do it. That was one of his acts of disobedience. And Samuel had to kill King Agag. But there's some question as to whether some of the survivors escaped into Persia, and one of those was the ancestor of Haman. And because of his hatred for the Jewish people, both because they attacked them as they were coming out of the Exodus, and because of what they did to his people, he had a particular vengeance for the Jewish nation and the Jewish people. Well, one day when this new prime minister, Haman, was walking through the city gates, all the rest of the officials bowed down before him except for one, and that is Mordecai. Mordecai would not bow down before Haman, and Haman was really upset. He was really ticked about that. And so he goes home and he talks to his wife and says, what do you think I should do about this? It makes me so hopping mad. And so she says, I've got an idea. Why don't you come up with an idea to kill all the Jewish people because you hate the Jewish people? And he says, that's a great idea. What do you think I should do? And she said, oh, you can come up with some kind of a plan. So he writes out this plan that he wants to do, and that is, his plan was to raise his own army, and then he would go to the king and convince him that the Jewish people all over the provinces should be killed. And so he calls his astrologers in, his occult practitioners, and they cast a lot. They literally tried to determine when the best time of the year to do that was, and the determination is that they would do that on the 12th month of the year. And they cast lots to determine that. And the casting of lot in Hebrew is the word purah. It's the word purah. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. So Haman now has got it in for the king. And so for the Jewish people. So he comes before King Xerxes and he says, hey, King Xerxes, I got to tell you about this. He says, lean in here because it's a secret. There are all these Jewish people that live out there, and they have their own God, and they worship and practice in their own way, and they don't do things like all the rest of us do, and they live in their own little enclaves, and they keep all the laws, but they have their own laws too, and they control a large amount of their money, and so I think we should get rid of them because who knows what's going to happen. And Xerxes says, well, Haman, if that's what you think we should do, then go ahead and draft up a law. Because my name is Xerxes. And so Haman comes up with this idea and puts it before the king. And the king says, I think it's a good idea. On the 13th day of the 12th month, you can raise your own army up and you can assassinate and kill all the Jewish people living in the provinces. So Haman is like really happy about this whole thing. Well, Mordecai, who's in the gates, finds out about the signing of the king. And he's upset. He dresses in sackcloth and ashes, and he's beginning to mourn. And when Esther sees word that her dad, Mordecai, is mourning, she sends word and said, why are you mourning, Mordecai? And Mordecai sends word back and says, because the king has signed an edict into law that all Jewish people are to be slaughtered on the 13th day of the 12th month. And so he says, you're the queen, Esther. You've got to do something about this. And Esther says, are you kidding me? I mean, if I go before the king without him asking me to go before him, he'll kill me. I mean, that's the rule. You don't go to the king unless he calls you by name. Do you remember what Vashti did? And Mordecai says these words to her. On page 279 of the story, Esther chapter 4, Mordecai writes, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent in this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from a different place. God isn't done with them yet. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, Esther, who knows but that you have come to the royal position for just such a time as this. So Esther thinks about this for a few days, and she sends word back to Mordecai and answers in this way on page 279. Go gather together all the Jews who are on Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or night, and I and my maids will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Well, 3 days later, Xerxes is holding court. And Esther comes into the palace. And she's standing outside of the palace walls. Thank you. Xerxes is holding court. And she comes to the palace by herself. And when the doors open into the audience room, Xerxes sees Esther standing there. This is that moment of truth. And Xerxes said, and it's in the ancient Persian, literally translated, "Hey there, red hot mama, what you doing here this day?" It's there in Persian. He said, "You're looking mighty fine in that bright red dress you have on. Why don't you come on in here to your sugar daddy and ask me what you want?" And so she comes in and approaches Xerxes. And he said, "You are looking fine today, my queen." He said, what can I do? Anything for you, up to half my kingdom. And she says, "Honey, sweet lips, what I really want, more than anything else, is for you just to come over and have lunch with me this afternoon. Late lunch, say 3 o'clock. And bring Haman, the prime minister, with you, would you?" And he says, "We will be there with bells on, sweetheart." And so he calls in Haman and says to Haman, "Hey, we have lunch later today with Queen Esther." And Haman is stoked. He's thinking, this is really awesome. This is really cool. And so he goes home and for this amazing luncheon that he was called to go to. And it was a great party. And they had wonderful food. And Mordecai was there, or excuse me, he wasn't there. Xerxes was there, and Haman was there, and Queen Esther feeds them a wonderful meal. And when the meal is over, the king is just so pleased. And he said, "Man, you fixed all my favorites, everything." He said, "What can I do for you, my queen? Up to half my kingdom is yours, whatever you want." And she said, "What I really want, sweetheart, is for you to come back for dinner tomorrow night. And bring Haman with you, would you?" And the king says, "Whatever you want, honey." And they kiss. And now Haman is like really stoked. He's really excited about this. And so he goes home, and on his way home, he walks through the city gates. He's bragging to everybody, "Had dinner with the king and queen. Yeah, we're just like this." And as they were, or like this, and as they were walking home, he walked through the city gates. And when he went through the city gates, all the officials bowed except for Mordecai. And this really bothered Haman. In fact, he was mortified. I'm sorry, it's just too easy. And he goes home to his wife, and he says, "You know, I was with the king and the queen. I've been invited back tomorrow night for another dinner. I went through the gates, and Mordecai didn't bow down to me, and I'm just so upset about it. What should I do?" And she said, "I've got an idea. Why don't you go to Xerxes, since you're so close to him, and why don't you ask him to hang Mordecai on a post? Make up something and have him killed." He said, "That sounds like a great idea." And she says, "Why don't you get some of your guys to go ahead and build a 50-foot tall pole outside the house, and when he gives you permission, you can hang Mordecai on it." So he liked this. So he leaves the house and heads to the palace. Now, the king Xerxes had gone home, had a lot of glasses of red wine, so he was ready to take a nap. And he's laying in bed trying to fall asleep, but he can't do it. He's tossing and turning all night long. And so he finally gets up and he says, "I need somebody to read me something. Maybe I can go to sleep if they read me a story." So he brings one of his scribes in to read the chronicles of history. That is what's going on in the kingdom. Because King Xerxes thinks, if somebody will read me history, I'll go to sleep. Some of you have the same problem. And so the guy starts reading him history, and he's reading about the fact that Mordecai sent word that saved his life. And the king says, "What's been done for this Mordecai, for what he did for me? That's amazing." And the scribe says, "Sir, there's nothing in the chronicles that says what he did." And so he says, "Something ought to be done." He said, "Who's in my courtyard who could take care of this for me?" And the chronicler said, "Well, I just saw Haman come walking in." And so he brings Haman in, and he says, "Haman, what should be done for somebody that the king wants to honor?" Now, Haman thinks it's himself. And so he comes up with the plan. And he says, "What I think you should do, O king, is, let's see, I think you should get one of your horses, one of your great stallions, yeah, and you should put your saddle on it, one of the golden saddles with your crest on the side of it. And I think you should get one of your robes, one of the ones you've worn, you know, king, one of the really nice ones, and put it on this guy. And then you should get one of your head officials, a big wig from the government. And you should have him put that person you want to honor on top of the horse wearing your robe, and that person should lead that person all around the city of Susa and proclaim, this is what happens to someone whom the king wants to honor. That's what you should do. And Xerxes says, great idea. Haman, go get Mordecai, wrap him in the robe, put him on a horse, and lead him throughout the city. Now Mordecai, Haman is mortified. And so he goes and finds Mordecai and gets one of the king's horses. And he puts Mordecai on the king's horse, and he parades him around the city. And I bet he started off by saying, this is what the king does to somebody he wants to honor. And I bet Mordecai said, say it louder. This is what is done for someone the king wants to honor. And he leads them around the city all day long. And finally, when it was over with, Mordecai is so upset, so mad, that he runs home and he literally cries to his wife. Well, later that night, King Xerxes and Haman go to Queen Esther's house for dinner. And she fixes them an incredible dinner, wonderful dinner. And at the end of the dinner, the king is just so much in love with his queen that he says, hey, sweetheart, he said, I'll give you anything you want, up to half the kingdom. Whatever you want is yours. And she said, well, king, what I really want is to tell you that someone in your palace has tricked you into drafting a law that you will kill all the Jewish people on the 13th day of the 12th month. And I think you need to know, king, that includes me, because I am also a Jewish person. And the king is really upset. And he said, tell me, who is it that drafted such a law? And Esther said, it was him. Now with that, Xerxes is so upset, but he's had like 6 glasses of wine. So he goes out to the garden to do what guys do. And when he goes out to the garden, Haman realizes he's in real trouble. So he wants to ask Queen Esther to forgive him. And she's on her couch laying down, as they would eat during that time. And he comes in, and he must have stumbled or something, because as he does so, he falls on the couch right next to her. And just about that time, King Xerxes comes walking back in. And he sees Haman on the same couch as his queen, and he thinks he's about to rape her. And now he is fit to be tied. He was mad before, now he's livid. And he announces that the guards come in, and they took Haman out, and they put him on a pole, and he's out of the picture. And they kiss and make up. And the king now says, well, I don't have a queen, and I don't have another prime minister. Do you have any ideas about who I should get to be the new prime minister? And Esther says, I have an idea about somebody. And so she calls on her dad, Mordecai. He has to get off his horse. And he comes in, and Xerxes names him as the new prime minister of the land. But both Mordecai and Esther tell the king, there's a problem. You signed into law that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jewish people are to be killed by the mercenaries that were hired by Haman. And it's the law of the Medes and the Persians. You can't change it, so what are we going to do? And Xerxes says, I'm so in love. You just figure it out, Mordecai, and whatever you want to do, I'll sign into law. So Mordecai drafts a statement. And the statement is basically that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jewish people are allowed to arm themselves from the king's armory and to defend themselves when they are attacked. And the rest of the government officials in the 127 provinces thought they don't want to upset King or Mordecai or the prime minister or the king, and so they side with the Jewish people. And on the 13th day of the 12th month, when the Jewish people are attacked, the fact is that all of the rest of the people of Persia sided with the Jewish people, went to battle against the rest of the Haman's henchmen, and as a result, they were overcome. The Jewish people were saved, and God blessed his people. And from that day forward, Haman drafted a law, Mordecai wrote a law that said every Jewish person from that day forward should celebrate this great event every year. And that great event should be celebrated as the celebration of God saving his people and what Queen Esther did. And from that day forward, Jewish people have celebrated the feast of Purim, the lot. And they celebrate it to this day. And they all lived happily ever after. All right. Well, Esther faced her crossroad moment. What would she do? How would she respond? And did you notice how God had been weaving this all together like a fine piece of music? How he'd taken this instance, this situation, and had put this together in a masterpiece so that it begins to move like music as the themes begin to thrive throughout, and it builds to this crescendo, this point. Esther, who knows, but you have been called to the kingdom for just such a time as this. What will she do? How will she respond? But understand that it didn't start there. It all started with Mordecai remembering who he was and whose he was. When he was taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar into Babylon with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he never forgot that he was a Jewish man, that he was one of God's people, one of God's children, one of God's kingdom citizen. And although he fit into the culture, he maintained his integrity as a man of God. He always remembered who he was and whose he was. And it started when Mordecai taught his daughter Esther who she was and whose she was. So that even though she was brought into the palace as the queen and had all sorts of privilege, she never forgot that she was a daughter of the King of Kings, that she was a daughter of God and a kingdom citizen. It all started when Mordecai remembered, when he taught his daughter to remember, and it continued with Mordecai taking his stand. When Haman came walking through the gates, he would not bow down before him. And this meant that he risked it all to do so. He would not worship Haman as a god. He would not do that because there's only one God that he would bow the knee to, and that was the Lord God of Israel. And it continued when Esther took her stand, risking it all. I will go before the king, and if I perish, I perish. It was her crossroad moment. And it was all surrounded and wrapped up in prayer and fasting. God, we're seeking your will. Give us direction. Let us know what we should do. And it was all wrapped up and surrounded by faith being put into action. Crossroad moments. Crossroad moments. You never know when they're going to come. It may be when you're asked to do something that as a child of God you shouldn't do. Lie on this report. Do this. Cheat. Steal. Do something that's wrong. When you're asked by your friends or your boss or someone else to do something that you know as a child of God you should not and cannot do, it's your crossroad moment. How will you respond? When you know that you have the opportunity to speak out the name of Jesus, but you're afraid because at the workplace you're not supposed to do that. Or you're afraid because if you do it, you might be persecuted, as going on in many places in this world. It's your crossroad moment. Or when the opportunity presents itself to do something in the name of the Lord, and you know if you do it, it's going to brand you as a Christian, and it may cost you friends, it may cost you your job. It's your crossroad moment. Or maybe in a more practical way, when the bills stack up and you don't see how tithing is really going to help the situation. It's a crossroad moment. And if you wait to decide until you are in the heat of the moment, you're liable to fall. That's why it's so critical that you need to decide how and where you will stand now. Alexander Hamilton said, "Those who stand for nothing will fall for anything." So where do you stand? Because you have to decide now so you're prepared when that crossroad moment comes. And you have to say, for who knows, but that I have come for just such a time as this. Now, I want to be real straight with you folks right now. That crossroad moment may be for you right now, today. You may have been for years saying, I want to become a Christian. I'll get right with God. I'll do what He wants me to do. I'll be baptized, picturing Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. I'll do that someday. I'm just not going to do it today. Well, maybe today God has called you here for just such a time as this. And today you are facing a crossroad moment. How will you respond? Where will you stand? And maybe for others in this room, there is some continued disobedience before God that you find yourself in. And you know it isn't God's will. Maybe you're living together and not married. Or maybe you're choosing practices and habits that you know are not what God wants for you. They're not God's best for you. And you've been brought here for just such a time as this. A crossroad moment. Where will you stand? And it's my prayer as you deal with this crossroad moment, but you will realize that you have come for just such a time as this. And your decision will be, I will respond seeking God's will. And if it costs me everything, if I perish, then it costs me everything. I perish. Most of you know that my son Jeremy, our son Jeremy, was born with hemophilia, and as a result of that, he acquired HIV and AIDS as a result of blood transfusion. And he died when he was 15 years of age. But when he was 13 in the 7th grade, he was hit and miss because his illness was affecting him and wasn't able to go all the time. And he knew the score of his life. He knew that he was dying. He'd known it for several years. And when he came home one day from school in the 7th grade, his teacher had given him an assignment. 7th or 8th grade? 7th grade? 7th grade. His literature teacher had given him an assignment. She'd given him a list of the first words of sentences, and he was supposed to fill it in. And he came to me and said, Dad, I don't know how to do this. And I said, Jeremy, just pray about it. Just ask God to lead you and just write down what's on your heart. And so my 13-year-old son, who knew that he was dying, if you can imagine, went to his bedroom and penned these words. The first 2 words were from the teacher. The rest are what he wrote. And he said this: I am a Christian. I love the Lord my God. I wonder why everybody does not. I hear the insults and the blasphemers. I see the blasphemers and I pray for them. I want everybody to be saved, but I know that's not possible. I am a Christian and I love the Lord my God. I pretend my Lord comes back every day. I feel hurt for those who aren't saved. I touch my Bible and pray. I worry about some of my friends I won't see. I cry for those friends who aren't saved like me. I am a Christian. I love the Lord, my God. I understand why I will not see some of my friends. I dream I can change their ways. I try to change their ways, but I can't. I hope they will change their ways on their own. But I am a Christian. I love the Lord, my God. At a crossroad moments in his life, he made his stand. Crossroad moments. Let me ask you, what are you willing to die for? And maybe more importantly, what are you willing to live for? But that's your decision. What will you decide today? God, today we come to you and looking at these amazing crossroad moments that Esther faced, that Mordecai faced, and that we all face. And I pray that you'd help us to decide today that we will choose to stand with you. And when those crossroad moments come, there's not a question that we will stand because we've given our all to you. Help us make the decisions you want us to make today, we ask. In Jesus' name.